Ladies and gentlemen, today I invite you to reflect on a truth that echoes throughout the pages of history and resonates in the depths of our hearts: the power of leaving everything in God's hands. It is a simple statement, yet one that holds profound meaning and challenges our very way of living. We live in a world full of uncertainties, where control often seems like the only way to feel secure. But there is a higher call, a deeper understanding that brings true peace and freedom: the call to place everything, yes, everything, in the hands of the one who knows all, sees all, and holds all. We begin with the most profound understanding: God is sovereign. This means that He reigns supreme over the universe. The same God who created the heavens and the earth is the God who holds your life in His hands. He is not taken by surprise by the twists and turns of your journey. He is not bewildered by the challenges you face. Instead, He orchestrates everything, from the grand movements of galaxies to the smallest details of our existence, with divine precision. God's plans are higher and greater than ours. He declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways," and this truth should humble us. It should make us pause and realize that the very control we cling to so desperately is, in fact, an illusion. We are invited to trust the one who is infinitely wise and knows what is best. Yet, despite this knowledge, we often struggle. We struggle to let go. We find ourselves caught in a whirlwind of worry, anxiety, and stress, desperately trying to micromanage every aspect of our lives. We are constantly pushing, striving, and planning, believing that our efforts alone will lead us to our desired outcomes. But in our pursuit of control, we lose sight of something vital: the beauty of surrender. To leave everything in God's hands is not to give up responsibility. It is to acknowledge that there is a higher wisdom at work, one that sees the end from the beginning and works all things together for good. God's sovereignty invites us to rest, to find assurance in knowing that our lives are not a series of random events, but part of a divine masterpiece. The second challenge is to trust in God's timing. We live in a fast-paced world that demands immediate results. We are used to instant gratification and become frustrated when things don't happen on our schedule. But God's ways are not our ways, and His timing is often different from ours. He knows when we are ready and when the circumstances are perfectly aligned. What we perceive as delays are often divine alignments, orchestrated to teach us patience and build our character. There is purpose in waiting, though it often feels uncomfortable. It is in the waiting that our faith is refined and our trust in God is deepened. We are called to believe that His timing is perfect, even when our impatience whispers otherwise. This brings me to a challenge that is perhaps the hardest of all: relinquishing control. Human nature drives us to fix things, to come up with solutions, and to manipulate circumstances. We want to be the captain of our own destiny. But there comes a moment in life when we must recognize that our efforts are limited and that true power lies in surrendering to God's will. Relinquishing control does not mean we become passive or indifferent. It means that we release our desperate grip on life, allowing God to move. When we surrender, we make room for the supernatural to intervene in the natural. We allow divine strength to step into our weakness and God's wisdom to enter our confusion. There is freedom in letting go, a sense of relief in knowing that the battle is not ours but the Lord's. As we release our burdens into God's hands, we discover a profound peace. This peace is not something the world can offer. It is the kind of peace that surpasses all understanding. It is the peace that comes when you know that no matter what happens, God has you covered. It is a shield around your heart and mind, protecting you from the storm raging outside. To rest in God's peace is not to be free from challenges, but to experience a divine calm in the middle of them. When we trust God fully, fear loses its grip and worry begins to fade. Yet, even as we leave our concerns in God's hands, we are not called to a life of inaction. Faith without works is dead. We are invited to step out in faith, to obey God's voice even when we do not understand. Obedience is the evidence of trust. It is saying, "God, I will go where you send me, even if I cannot see the full picture. I will do what you ask, even if it doesn't make sense right now." Our role is not to see the entire plan, but to take the next step, trusting that God is directing our path. It is in these acts of faith that we see miracles unfold, for God honors those who walk by faith and not by sight. Finally, leaving everything in God's hands means expecting divine outcomes. It is not a resignation to fate, but a confident expectation that God will move in ways beyond our understanding. It is believing that the God who split the sea, who healed the sick, and who raised the dead is still at work today. He is still performing wonders, still making a way where there seems to be none. When we leave everything in His hands, we do so with anticipation, with a heart that expects His goodness and His faithfulness to be revealed. Life is often a journey marked by waiting. We wait for dreams to be realized, for prayers to be answered, and for doors to open. In our human experience, waiting can be one of the most difficult things to endure. We live in a world that values speed, where technology provides us with information and solutions in an instant. We have come to expect the same kind of quick response from God. When things do not happen on our timetable, we grow anxious, frustrated, and even doubtful. Yet the concept of God's timing invites us to see waiting not as a burden, but as a profound opportunity to develop patience and strengthen our faith. God's timing is perfect. It may sound like a simple truth, but when we face seasons of delay, it is one that requires deep understanding and trust. His timing is not random or haphazard. It is deliberate, purposeful, and precise. What we often perceive as God being late or unresponsive is, in fact, a carefully orchestrated plan unfolding in its appointed season. We serve a God who sees the bigger picture, who knows the intricacies of our past, present, and future. He knows when we are ready to receive His blessings and when circumstances are perfectly aligned for His purposes to be fulfilled. Waiting on God is not about sitting idly by. It is about trusting that His ways are higher and that He is working behind the scenes in ways we cannot comprehend. Think about the stories of faith recorded in the Bible. Abraham was given a promise that he would become the father of many nations, yet he had to wait years before Isaac was born. Joseph had dreams of greatness but endured betrayal, imprisonment, and disappointment before those dreams came to pass. The Israelites wandered for 40 years before reaching the promised land. And even Jesus, the Son of God, waited 30 years before beginning His public ministry. Each of these individuals experienced seasons of waiting, and each journey was marked by God's perfect timing. The waiting was never wasted. It was a season of preparation, growth, and positioning for something far greater. Yet, in our humanity, waiting tests us. We feel the weight of delay, the discomfort of not having control, and the doubts that creep in. We wonder if God has forgotten us, if perhaps we have been overlooked. But faith calls us to a different perspective. Faith reminds us that delays are not denials. Faith whispers that God is at work even when we do not see it. Trusting in God's timing is a test of our confidence in Him. It asks, do we really believe that He is good? Do we really trust that He knows what is best for us? It is in these moments of uncertainty that our trust in God is refined and solidified. Patience is a virtue that is often developed in the waiting room of life. It is not a passive trait but an active endurance. It is the ability to remain steadfast and hopeful, even when things do not seem to be going our way. Patience teaches us to appreciate the journey, to embrace the lessons that come with waiting, and to recognize the growth happening within us. It reminds us that God's timing is tied to His purpose. Sometimes the wait is necessary for our transformation. We may need to learn humility, develop resilience, or acquire wisdom before we can step into the fullness of what God has in store for us. But let us not mistake patience for complacency. While we wait on God, we are called to live in a state of active faith. We must continue to pray, to seek His will, and to prepare for what He has promised. Just as a farmer waits for his crops to grow but continues to tend to the soil, we must nurture our faith and keep our hearts ready. We don't give up or lose hope. We hold on to His promises, knowing that His timing is always worth the wait. Faith is not just about believing in what God can do. It is about trusting in when He chooses to do it. There is a divine purpose in God's timing. It may feel like He is withholding something from us, but often He is protecting us or preparing us. Sometimes the things we desire may not be ready for us, or we may not be ready for them. God's delays are not punishments, but are acts of divine love. He loves us too much to give us something prematurely. What good is a blessing if it comes at the wrong time? Just as we would never serve an undercooked meal to our loved ones, God will never give us something that is not ready to be fully enjoyed. In these seasons of waiting, God asks us to anchor ourselves in His promises. He invites us to draw closer, to deepen our relationship with Him, and to find solace in His Word. The Scriptures are filled with reminders that those who wait on the Lord will find new strength. They will rise up with wings like eagles, run and not grow weary, walk and not faint. This strength is a supernatural empowerment that comes only from trusting in God's timing. It is a strength that defies human logic and fills us with hope. So as we navigate the journey of life, let us remember that God's delays are not rejections. His timing may not align with our plans, but it is always perfect. We are called to trust, to wait with expectation, and to believe that what He has in store is far greater than anything we could ever imagine. Letting go of control is one of the hardest things we are called to do as human beings. We like to believe we have control over our lives, our futures, and even the outcomes of situations we face. There is a sense of security in being able to plan, manipulate, and strategize every detail of our journey. But the truth is that our control is limited and our understanding is finite. Life is filled with circumstances that are beyond our ability to manage. And in those moments, we are confronted with a choice to keep striving or to relinquish control gracefully and allow God to work His divine will. The act of relinquishing control is an act of surrender. It requires humility and the recognition that we are not God, that we are not the architects of the universe or the authors of time. Surrender does not come naturally, it goes against our very instincts. We are conditioned to believe that strength comes from holding on, from fighting for what we want. Yet there is a greater strength in letting go. It takes profound courage to say, God, I trust You more than I trust myself. I release my plans, my anxieties, and my will into Your hands. This surrender is not a sign of weakness, but an acknowledgement of God's supreme authority and wisdom. We must come to terms with the reality that our perspective is limited. We see only what is right in front of us, the immediate hurdles and challenges. But God sees the entire picture, the intricate web of events that interconnect and shape our destinies. Our view is like looking through a keyhole, while God's perspective encompasses the entire landscape. When we insist on holding tightly to our plans, we may inadvertently hinder God's greater work. Relinquishing control means accepting that His ways are higher and His plans are better, even when we cannot understand them in the moment. Consider the times when we try to manipulate outcomes to fit our desires. We exhaust ourselves, driven by the anxiety that comes with trying to manage every aspect of our lives. We attempt to force relationships, pursue opportunities that are not meant for us, or hold on to things that God is asking us to release. And what do we gain? Often our efforts leave us weary, frustrated, and spiritually depleted. We find ourselves tangled in the consequences of our own striving, missing the beauty of what God wants to do in and through us. Relinquishing control gracefully is an invitation to freedom. It is a release from the heavy burden of always having to figure things out. It is stepping back and saying, God, I give You permission to take over. This does not mean that we become passive or indifferent. On the contrary, it calls us to an active trust in God's providence. We continue to do our part to make wise decisions and to walk in faith, but we do so with open hands and a surrendered heart. We acknowledge that the ultimate outcome is not ours to dictate. Jesus modeled this beautifully in the Garden of Gethsemane. Facing the agony of the cross, He prayed, not my will, but Yours be done. He exemplified perfect submission, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. If the Son of God could surrender His will to the Father, how much more should we? This moment of surrender led to the most significant victory in human history, the resurrection. It reminds us that our greatest triumphs often come on the other side of letting go. We are not surrendering to an indifferent or uncaring force. We are surrendering to a loving Father who desires the best for us. God's will is always motivated by His love. He sees what we cannot see and knows what we do not know. When we release control, we make room for miracles, for the divine to intersect with the ordinary. We open ourselves to possibilities that are greater than our limited imaginations. God is not confined by our plans or limited by our understanding. When we step aside, He steps in with power and grace. Relinquishing control also means embracing the unknown with faith. It means accepting that the journey may look different from what we envisioned, but trusting that God's plan is unfolding exactly as it should. It is in the moments of uncertainty that our faith is tested and refined. Can we trust God even when the path is unclear? Can we believe in His goodness when the outcome is not what we expected? True faith is forged in these moments of surrender, where we choose to believe that God is working for our good, even in the waiting and the not knowing. Sometimes God calls us to release our dreams or our vision of how life should be. He asks us to let go, not to deprive us, but to bless us in ways we never imagined. There are times when what we are holding on to so tightly is the very thing preventing us from experiencing God's best. Our grip on control can be an obstacle to divine intervention. When we relinquish our hold, we create space for God to work His miracles. To let go gracefully is to rest in God's faithfulness. It is to find peace in the assurance that He is in control and that His plans are perfect. It is to live each day with the knowledge that the one who created the stars and knows them by name is the same God who cares intimately about every detail of your life. Life is often a roller coaster of emotions, a whirlwind of challenges, and a constant stream of worries. Each of us at one point or another has felt overwhelmed by the weight of our circumstances, by the burden of the unknown, and by the constant need to solve our problems. We worry about our futures, our loved ones, our health, our finances, and countless other concerns that keep us up at night. But amid this chaos, there is a promise that stands unshaken, a promise of divine peace. A kind of peace that cannot be explained by human understanding. This peace comes when we truly place our worries in God's hands and trust Him to take care of us. Resting in God's peace does not mean that our lives will be free of challenges or that we will never face difficulties. It means that even when the storm rages around us, we can remain calm and confident. The peace that God gives is not tied to our circumstances, it is rooted in the very nature of God Himself. It transcends the logic and reasoning of the world. People may look at us and wonder how we can be at peace when everything seems to be falling apart. They may question our calm demeanor when faced with adversity. But that is the power of God's peace. It is supernatural. It goes beyond our understanding and defies the turmoil of our surroundings. To experience this peace, we must first be willing to place our worries in God's hands. This is easier said than done. Worry has a way of creeping into our hearts and minds, gripping us with fear and anxiety. We think about the what-ifs and allow our minds to spiral into worst-case scenarios. We try to hold on to control, thinking that if we just analyze the situation enough or worry about it long enough, we will somehow find a solution. But worry does not solve problems. It only steals our joy, robs us of our energy, and clouds our ability to see God at work. When we choose to let go of our worries and place them at God's feet, we are making a conscious decision to trust Him. This act of surrender is not a one-time event, it is a daily, sometimes moment-by-moment choice. It means acknowledging that we are not in control, but that God is, and His hands are capable and loving. It is understanding that He cares for us deeply and knows exactly what we need. We are invited to cast our cares on Him, for He is a God who delights in bearing our burdens and giving us rest. Imagine the weight of anxiety being lifted off your shoulders, replaced by a sense of calm that you cannot explain. That is what happens when we rest in God's peace. It does not mean we become indifferent or apathetic. It means we have a confidence that God is working everything out for our good, even when we cannot see the bigger picture. His peace guards our hearts and minds, protecting us from the onslaught of fear and doubt. It is like a fortress around our souls, a divine shield that keeps us steady. Consider the words of Philippians 4:6-7, where the Apostle Paul writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This passage gives us a powerful formula for experiencing God's peace. It calls us to bring everything to God in prayer and to do so with a heart of gratitude. Gratitude shifts our focus from what we lack to the abundance of God's goodness. It reminds us that we have much to be thankful for, and that God has already proven His faithfulness time and time again. Resting in God's peace also means silencing the voices of fear and tuning into the voice of our Heavenly Father. The world is loud, constantly bombarding us with reasons to be afraid and anxious. The news, social media, and even our own inner thoughts can fill us with dread. But God whispers to us, "Be still and know that I am God." In that stillness we find reassurance. We find the strength to let go of our need to understand everything and to accept that God's ways are higher. We learn to quiet our souls and listen to His promises. There is a deep sense of freedom in resting in God's peace. It frees us from the burden of trying to fix everything ourselves. It allows us to walk through life with a lightness of heart, knowing that we are held by a loving Father who never slumbers nor sleeps. When we rest in His peace, we are no longer driven by fear, we are led by faith. We are no longer paralyzed by the what-ifs, we are empowered by the God will. This peace is a gift freely given to us, but it requires us to let go and trust completely. The peace that God offers is not fragile. It is not dependent on how well our lives are going. It is steadfast and enduring. It gives us the ability to smile in the face of trials, to remain hopeful when things seem hopeless, and to extend grace to others even when we are under pressure. This peace transforms us, making us beacons of hope in a world desperate for reassurance. As we experience God's peace, we become witnesses to His faithfulness, showing others that there is a better way to live, a way anchored in trust, surrendered to His loving care. When we talk about leaving everything in God's hands, it's easy to imagine a life of complete passivity, where we simply sit back and wait for God to move. But that is not the full picture of faith. While trusting God means releasing our worries and surrendering our plans to Him, it also requires active participation. Our trust in God should be accompanied by action steps of faith and obedience that align with His will. We are called to live out our faith, to move forward in confidence, knowing that God is guiding our every step. Faith is not just a feeling or a mindset, it is an active, living force. The Bible is filled with examples of people who trusted God and demonstrated their faith through action. Abraham left his homeland not knowing where he was going, because he trusted God's promise. Moses lifted his staff and parted the Red Sea, even though the path forward seemed impossible. David faced Goliath with a sling and a stone, confident that God would deliver him. Each of these individuals could have chosen to stay in the comfort of inaction, but their faith propelled them to step out and do what God had called them to do. Their obedience made way for miracles. Acting in faith does not mean we know how everything will turn out. It does not mean we have a detailed roadmap of our future. Instead, it means moving forward even when we do not have all the answers. It is the willingness to take one step, trusting that God will reveal the next step in His timing. Our role is not to have everything figured out, but to be obedient to what God has asked of us today. Sometimes God's directions are clear and specific, and other times they require us to trust His gentle nudges. Either way, He promises to direct our paths if we lean on Him and not on our own understanding. Faith is a partnership with God. We bring our willingness and our trust, and God brings His power and divine direction. When we act in faith, we position ourselves to experience the fullness of God's plans. But acting in faith also requires courage. There will be times when what God asks of us feels uncomfortable or even impossible. We may have to take a step without seeing the entire staircase. We may have to walk through doors that seem too heavy to open or speak words that require vulnerability and boldness. It is in these moments that our faith is tested and strengthened. Obedience is the tangible expression of our trust in God. It is easy to say we believe in His promises, but true faith is demonstrated through action. When we obey God, even when it doesn't make sense, we show that we trust Him more than our circumstances. We trust Him more than our fears, our doubts, and even our own logic. Obedience is not always easy, but it is always rewarding. Each act of obedience builds spiritual muscle, making us more resilient and more confident in God's ability to lead us. Sometimes the steps God calls us to take may seem small or insignificant. He may prompt us to reach out to someone, to offer a word of encouragement, or to serve in a seemingly minor way. Yet, those small acts of obedience can have ripple effects that we cannot even begin to fathom. God sees the bigger picture, and He uses our willingness to make a difference. On other occasions, He may ask us to take bold and daring steps, leaving a job, starting a ministry, or moving to a new place. Whatever the call, our response should be the same, a heart that says, "Here I am, Lord, I trust You and I will follow." Faith-filled action does not mean we will never experience setbacks or face challenges. There may be times when we step out in obedience and things do not go as planned. But even in those moments, we can rest assured that God is still at work. He is refining our faith, teaching us valuable lessons, and aligning circumstances for our good. Acting in faith is about surrendering the outcome to God while being faithful to do our part. It is about planting seeds and trusting Him to bring the harvest in His perfect timing. When we move forward in faith, we create space for God's miracles. He delights in showing His power in and through our obedience. He honors the faith of those who dare to believe in His promises and act on them. As we walk in obedience, we experience the joy of partnering with the Creator of the universe, of being part of His incredible story. We come to see that our small acts of faith, when placed in God's hands, have the power to change lives, bring hope, and fulfill His divine purposes. So while we leave our worries and burdens with God, let us not become idle. Let us be people who act in faith, knowing that He is the one directing our steps. Let us step out with boldness, not because we have everything figured out, but because we know the one who does. When we truly place our concerns in God's hands and act in faith and obedience, there is one more crucial component: we must embrace expectation. We are called to expect divine outcomes, to believe that God, in His infinite wisdom and boundless love, will work all things out for our good. This is not wishful thinking or mere optimism. It is a confident assurance rooted in the character and promises of God. It is the belief that when we surrender our worries to Him, He is faithful to respond in ways that exceed our understanding. Expectation is a powerful act of faith. It requires us to look beyond our present circumstances and to anticipate the goodness of God manifesting in our lives. When we commit our concerns to God, we are not just hoping for a positive outcome, we are believing that God, in His sovereignty, will bring about something far greater than we could have orchestrated on our own. This does not mean that everything will always turn out the way we envisioned. God's ways are higher than our ways, and His plans often unfold in ways that surprise us. Yet we can trust that whatever the outcome, it will be for our ultimate benefit and His glory. And consider Romans 8:28, which says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." This verse is a promise that no situation is too messy, no problem too complex, and no heartbreak too deep for God to redeem and use for good. He is a master at taking what was meant for harm and transforming it into a testimony of His grace. Our job is to believe that He will do just that. We may not always understand His methods, but we can trust His heart. Expecting divine outcomes also means having the faith to wait for God's timing and His plan. It's about looking at our situations with spiritual eyes, seeing beyond the limitations of the natural and trusting in the supernatural. We may not always see immediate results, but faith assures us that God is at work, even in the silence and the waiting. Sometimes the process of waiting refines us, deepening our dependence on God and teaching us invaluable lessons. But through it all, we maintain an attitude of expectancy, knowing that God's timing is perfect and that His plans never fail. This expectation should fill our prayers with hope and confidence. When we pray, we are not just performing a religious duty, we are engaging with the Creator of the universe, who hears us and is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. We pray with the belief that God is not only willing but eager to intervene in our lives. We trust that He can open doors no one can shut, make a way where there seems to be no way, and bring beauty from ashes. Our expectation is not based on our circumstances but on the unchanging nature of God. Expecting divine outcomes does not mean we will never experience disappointments. There will be times when God's answers to our prayers look different from what we expected. There may be detours, delays, or outcomes that initially feel like setbacks. But even in those moments, we hold on to the truth that God is in control. We trust that He sees the end from the beginning and knows what is best for us. Sometimes God's greatest blessings come wrapped in unexpected packages. What we perceive as an unanswered prayer may actually be God protecting us or redirecting us to something better. This kind of expectation changes the way we live. It shifts our focus from fear and doubt to hope and anticipation. We begin to look for God's hand in every situation, even in the smallest details. We become attuned to His presence, recognizing that He is actively working on our behalf. This expectation fuels our gratitude because even before we see the outcome, we can thank God in advance, knowing He is faithful. It gives us a sense of peace because we are not waiting anxiously for things to happen but are resting in the assurance that God is in control. Living with expectation also empowers us to encourage others. When we experience the faithfulness of God firsthand, our testimonies become a source of hope for those around us. We become living examples of what it means to trust in God and believe in His promises. Our lives become a reflection of God's goodness, drawing others to Him and inspiring them to expect divine outcomes in their own circumstances. We speak words of life and hope, reminding people that God is able to do the impossible. Expecting divine outcomes is not just about getting what we wanted, it is about aligning our hearts with God's purposes. It is about being open to His will, knowing that His plans are better than anything we could design. It is about living in anticipation of His glory being revealed in our lives. When we commit our concerns to God, we can walk forward with confidence, not because we have all the answers, but because we know the one who does. We expect good things, not because life is always good, but because God is good. So as we leave everything in God's hands, let us do so with the unshakable expectation that He will bring about divine outcomes. Let us look forward with hope, knowing that our prayers are heard, our steps are guided, and our lives are held securely in the hands of a loving and all-powerful God. In conclusion, my friends, I want to leave you with this powerful truth. When you place your life, your dreams, your burdens, and your future in the hands of God, you are not surrendering to uncertainty, but stepping into a divine partnership with the Creator of the universe. Trusting God is not passive resignation, it is active faith. It is a belief that His plans for you are greater than anything you could imagine, and His timing is always perfect. It is knowing that even in the midst of trials, God is at work, orchestrating everything for your good. Understand this: God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are greater than our thoughts. When you rest in His peace, you are not just waiting for things to change, you are experiencing the assurance that the Creator of the universe is holding you in His hands. As you relinquish control, as you take those steps of faith and obedience, as you expect His divine outcomes, you position yourself for miracles that only He can deliver. Let go, my friends, and trust that the God who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. Your greatest victories will not come from your striving, but from your surrender. Walk in His peace, move in His timing, and act in His faith. The best is yet to come, and God will not disappoint those who trust in Him. Remember, the future is not in your hands, it is in His. And when you leave everything in God's hands, you can rest assured that everything is being worked out for your good and for His glory. So go ahead, let go, trust, obey, and watch as God does the impossible. The journey ahead is filled with promise, purpose, and divine potential. Keep your eyes on Him and know that He will lead you every step of the way.